If Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights is a violent storm born of the untamed earth, then Alexandre Dumas' Fils la Dame aux Camélias is a fragile blossom, quietly suffocated within the most exquisite greenhouse in Paris. Countless adaptations have romanticized this text, packaging it as a simple, tragic melodrama of a star-crossed courtier. But today, we strip away the sugar-coated veneer. Using a grounded, unflinching lens, we will dissect the elegant, polite, and thoroughly brutal social machinery of 19th century Paris. Our tragedy begins not with a romantic encounter, but with a cold liquidation of assets. The heroine, Marguerite Gautier, is already dead. The expensive jewelry she once wore, her carriages, even the very bed she slept on, everything is being bartered, appraised, and carved up by the high society of Paris under the auctioneer's gavel. In life, she was the crown jewel of Parisian desire. In death, she was not even left with a clean sheet to cover her bones. Let us deconstruct the reality of Marguerite Gautier without historical illusion. In the lexicon of 19th century France, she was termed a demi-mondaine or a courtesan. Stripped of these glamorous titles, her existence was far more precarious. She was a girl from the impoverished countryside who survived by renting her youth and emotional labor to fund a high-luxury lifestyle. She was an exquisite, high-liability enterprise entirely dependent on the patronage of aging dukes and wealthy young barons. The white camellia she wore was her corporate trademark. For 25 days of the month, she wore white camellias, signaling her availability. For 5 days, she wore red, politely declining suitors. The aristocracy paraded her through theaters and gambling dens as a status symbol, a living monument to their own disposable wealth. The overhead costs of her life were fatal, and beneath the white camellias lay a dark biological countdown: tuberculosis. Every violent cough in the dead of night, every drop of crimson wiped away with a silk handkerchief, was a notice of foreclosure from destiny. She had to remain beautiful, for the moment she ceased to entertain, the shop windows of Paris would discard her like refuse. She wore the softest velvet, but she walked on the edge of a razor. Into this arena of manufactured affection stepped an anomaly: Armand Duval. Armand was a young provincial newly arrived in Paris, possessing a modest family inheritance, a romantic disposition, and a mind thoroughly intoxicated by idealism. He was entirely distinct from the seasoned wolves who frequented Marguerite's salon. The others cared only if Marguerite's beauty could elevate their social standing. Armand cared if anyone brought her a glass of warm water when she suffocated from coughing. He was the only one who saw the fragile human being beneath the expensive porcelain facade. Marguerite had spent years trading in diamonds, but she had never encountered a sincerity so reckless it ignored the price tag. Armand's sincerity was a beautiful, lethal poison to Marguerite. She allowed herself to believe she could survive outside her golden cage. She resolved to flee the capital, escaping with him to a quiet cottage in the countryside. To buy her freedom, she began pawning her jewels, selling her carriages, and liquidating her Parisian assets to pay off her staggering debts. She attempted to buy her way out of the social ledger. For a few months, she lived a life detached from gravity. She was no longer the lady of the camellias. She was simply a woman in love. But this peace was an illusion. Marguerite's fragile health required expensive medical care, and her lifestyle had left her with uncompromised immunity to poverty. She kept the mounting costs hidden from Armand, quietly selling her remaining possessions to subsidize their domestic dream, knowing all too well that the moment economic destitution breached their walls, their fragile romance would shatter. She tried to love like an ordinary woman, but she had already lost the currency required to survive the reality of the floorboards. This fragile sanctuary was dismantled on a quiet afternoon by a man representing the absolute, unyielding weight of bourgeois respectability. Monsieur Duval arrived. He carried no weapons, nor did he offer a single vulgar insult. He was a man of impeccable manners and absolute civility. Yet it was precisely this refined decorum that made his intervention so surgically lethal. Stripped of polite euphemisms, his ultimatum to Marguerite was clear. "Mademoiselle, I believe in your affection for my son, but in the architecture of this world, certain pasts can never be erased. As long as you are with Armand, his social standing is ruined, and his career is dead. More urgently, his innocent sister is engaged to a prestigious family who will break the betrothal if their name is linked to a Parisian courtesan. If you truly love my son, you will not allow your shadow to destroy the future of his family. Monsieur Duval's masterstroke was his refusal to bribe or vilify her. Instead, he weaponized Marguerite's own nobility and her profound, selfless love for Armand, turning it into the very hostage that would force her surrender. Monsieur Duval handed Marguerite a blade wrapped in the language of maternal sacrifice and told her to sever her own veins. Marguerite collapsed internally. She realized that all her sacrifices, her pawned diamonds, and her desperate attempts to purify her life meant absolutely nothing to the established social order. In their eyes, she would always be a stain on the family ledger. To preserve Armand's future, she chose the path of absolute, agonizing martyrdom. She promised the father not only that she would leave Armand, but that she would do so in a manner so cruel he would hate her forever. She had to make him believe she was bored of their provincial domesticity and longed for the opulent degradation of Paris. She tore her own soul to shreds and forced herself back into the hollow armor of the Lady of the Camélias. The moment her carriage departed for Paris, the woman who had dared to dream of a clean life was already dead. Returning to Paris, Marguerite did not find her old luxury. She found a systematic campaign of psychological destruction waged by Armand. Ignorant of the truth, Armand knew only that he had been abandoned for her former life. The humiliation converted his pure love into a monstrous, vengeful malice. He pursued her through every ballroom and theater, culminating in a public gambling den, where he hurled a fortune of $1 into her face, screaming that he was paying his debts to his former mistress. The aristocracy laughed, entertained by the theater of it all. Marguerite stood there, absorbing the impact of the metal against her flesh without uttering a single word of defense. Gold coins left bruises on her skin, but the true fatality was the knowledge that the only man she had ever loved had become her public executioner. Under the weight of this spiritual exile, her consumption returned with apocalyptic force. As her health failed, the fair-weather nobility who had once fought to be seen at her side vanished. No one in Paris wished to underwrite a dying, bankrupt woman. Her furniture was seized, her wardrobe collateralized, and she was left to rot in a cold apartment with only a single maid to witness her final breaths. In her final days, every breath felt like a shard of glass tearing through her lungs. Lacking the strength to speak, she poured her confession, her love, and her final, absolute despair into a journal. She died in the deep freeze of a Parisian winter, surrounded by debt collectors and an unyielding silence, without ever receiving a single word of closure from the man she died to protect. Instrumental music swells, continuing the thought from the previous narration. By the time Armand returned to Paris, Marguerite was no more. He found her apartment cold and empty, her belongings sold at auction. A neighbor told him the grim truth of her final days, consumed by illness and debt, her lonely death, and her unceremonious burial in the anonymous depths of a communal cemetery. Why does Dumas' La Dame aux Camélias endure across centuries? Because it is the immaculate record of a polite, civil homicide. The aristocrats of Paris consumed her youth. Armand drained her remaining hope with his volatile passion, and Monsieur Duval systematically extinguished her soul, using the leverage of family honor. Everyone acted according to the established rules of the era. Everyone remained respectable, dignified, and correct. Yet, the sum total of their collective respectability was the execution of an innocent life that wanted nothing more than to be clean. The velvet of Paris remains soft, the champagne remains cold. The display windows of the capital will soon feature a younger, fresher Camellia to entertain the boxes. And Marguerite Gautier, the country girl who dared to love, is left forgotten at the very bottom of the dirt.